Muriel Ashley. Hi, Muriel.
Hello, everybody. Sorry I couldn't make it in person.
That's okay. Hi, Stu.
Hello.
Hi there. I'm glad you're at the beach.
That's my backyard.
I know.
That's nice.
Great. It's great. Are we the only three on Zoom?
Joan will be here in a minute. Oh, here she is.
No, but I mean.
Oh.
Yes.
So far, yes, but there's still 2 minutes to go. So,
Okay.
this is Sinai.
Mhm.
Here, now the room can wave to you. Wave to everyone at home, guys. Woo!
Hi, Joan.
Hi.
I haven't seen you since Tuesday night.
Right. Oh, it's your chair. If you can move your chair a little bit to the right, then you can move it.
Sounds like us, Joan.
I thought we were on mute.
Where?
Oh, okay. I don't know how that links together, but okay. Usually, Connie.
Those seem to be poor lighting.
Yes, very poor. It's dark. That's your alarm for the game. This is competition with the Yukon women's basketball. This is big time competition.
Oh, is that what's going on? There's basketball tonight?
Yukon women. Ha ha ha.
I didn't know that.
Big time competition.
Yep.
Is that tonight, Rabbi?
So I hear. That's what
I saw. Alexis. I'm gonna mute us.
All right. Folks at home, I am going to mute you for now. And then along the way, if you have something you'd like to share, all you got to do is unmute and let me know. You can also see that I have changed the screen to the slides, and so I won't be able to see folks at home if they're looking to speak. So if you're at home and you have something to share, just unmute and speak up.
Jay, we can't read the slide.
Yeah, that's going to be a challenge.
Oh,
Okay.
all
Let me
right.
think about how to. What I'm going to do is I'm going to try putting into the chat box a link. Give me a quick second to figure out how to do this right. And you can click on the link and open up the PowerPoint. Let's see here. There we go. And then you can follow along with the slides much more visible for you. Hold on a second. Where's chat? There it is. Okay. So, okay. So somebody at home, see if you can click on the link and see if it'll actually open up the slideshow that I'll be using, and that might help you flip. You'll have to flip back and forth.
Do we have to leave and come back?
No, you'll just have it on a different screen on your computer, so you'll still hear me talking, but you'll open up what everyone sees here in front of you, and then you'll be good to go.
On the chat?
It works. It works.
He can't hear you.
What do we do, Stu?
Okay,
Oh,
here we
Just
go.
click
Ready?
on, go to,
You do it, Stu. Go ahead and tell them.
Go to the chat at the bottom of the screen
yes,
and click on that.
on where it says new message.
New message. Did you click on the chat box? The chat on,
I did.
you should see a little link at the top, right under Rabbi Jay's name
Ah,
at the top.
okay.
If you click on that link, it should come up.
Yes.
All right.
Definitely impressed.
All right.
Okay.
So,
And what you can do is, here's another trick for you. If you just do Alt Tab, you can swap between seeing the rabbi and seeing the PowerPoint.
If we do
Little trick.
what? Say that
Alt-
again?
You push the Alt key, say with your thumb, and hit the Tab key with your finger, kind of at the same time. You can flip back and forth between the rabbi and
Okay.
the PowerPoint.
so Stu, I'm
Okay,
gonna.
we see the
ahead.
rabbi in the slides. Good.
Okay. So everybody at home,
Thank you.
be quiet. I'm going to do my best with the slides. Actually, now the people at home may find they have an advantage because a lot of the slides are fairly detailed maps. And so after the session, I will email out all the resources I talk about tonight, including the slideshow with all the maps for you to look at so you can get nice up and close and look at it. I suppose I actually could have probably, it would have been smart to make copies here of all this stuff for people. Let me see who's like, would you mind? Okay, so Michelle is going to go make, how many, yeah. Michelle says she assumes that the copy machine is self-explanatory. That depends on you more than the machine. All right, everyone, welcome back. We've got a nice group at home and a nice group in the room. You've seen each other and waved, and we're just going to try to integrate the experience now. So again, I'll just repeat one more time for people at home. It'll be difficult for me because of the way I'm setting up the conversation here and the materials. It'll be difficult for me to see if you have something you want to share. If you have a question or you want to ask something, comment on something. So I'm going to need you at home to just unmute if you need to and jump in, and then I'll switch over the screen to you. Make sense? So somebody's phone has been beeping, which I get. Go ahead, please, everyone, take a moment and just silence them. That'll make everything a little more manageable. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to start with a blessing. This is the blessing over learning. And I say it as often as I can. The Jewish blessing over learning is about being affected by what you learn. So maybe there'll be something tonight that you come across and you just leave thinking about it and chewing on it and having to reconsider something that you knew all along to be absolutely correct. It's never quite as black and white and easy as we wish it was. So if you know the words, say them with me. If you're a little struggling, challenged by Hebrew, you can just say Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So last session, my goal in going through that timeline far too quickly was to try to demonstrate to you the migration of our people and the relationship that we maintained through those centuries of movement to the idea of homeland. We wouldn't have really called it Israel. We were the people Israel. We didn't call the place Israel until 1948, when David Ben-Gurion pronounced a declaration of independence with a new Jewish homeland known by the name of Medinat Yisrael, the State of Israel. We talked about the difference between the people of Israel, the State of Israel, and the land of Israel. And so today, part of what we're going to do is we're going to move our way through modern history from about 1880 until more or less to today. But I'm not going to be tackling the conflicts in Gaza, the West Bank, and Jordan, and add on Iran and Yemen and Syria and anywhere else you care to add on, because they're all upset with us. We're not going to talk about that tonight. My intent is that we're going to find one more night to make up one of the 2 sessions that we did not have. And thank you, by the way, for your flexibility and understanding. So you will have all this material in a few moments, but I'm going to start by showing you the lyrics one more time of a text which is close to our heart, the words of Hatikva, to just remind you what we've been telling ourselves in various forms of modern and ancient liturgy. And it is this, that as long as the heart within the Jewish soul yearns, and towards the ends of the east, the Jewish eye gazes towards Zion, then our hope is not lost. The hope of 2,000 years. That hope is to be a free nation in our land, in the land of Zion and Jerusalem. Okay, so thank you so much, Michelle. All right, folks at home, now the people in the room have a copy of the slides that you'll be looking at as well. Oh, yeah, with some of the later slides, it'll help more, but yeah, like that. So this next slide is the first map that we're going to look at. And don't worry that you can make out very little in your slides. If you want, you can look at it in a zoomed up fashion later tonight on your electronic version. But what I want you to see here is that there was a tiny, difficult to prove, but we believe a tiny constant presence of Jews who lived in the land we call Israel from the year 70. That was when the Romans sacked Jerusalem and dispersed us for the final time. From that moment until today, we do believe archaeologically that there was a constant presence of Jews in the land. For some, that really matters. It makes a difference to say, we never left. For others, that's a very, very weak argument. So it depends on what your approach to the discussion or debate looks like. But the Jews started really showing back up in this land, and I'm just going to call it Israel for the sake of politics and ease and clarity. This land was not called Israel in 1880. This land was called Palestine. It was, for a long time, hundreds of years, controlled by the Ottoman Empire. And as the Ottoman Empire began to crumble and the colonialists of Europe, the French and the British, began carving up the Middle East, this land became part of the British Mandate. So in 1880, we start to see Jews who are beginning to move in. It's not the British Mandate yet. That doesn't happen until 1919, with the Peel Commission. But in 1880, the Jews in Europe are getting tired of pogroms, and they begin to ideologically move. They're not yet really fleeing en masse to this new dream, but they are saying we are being driven by something that is powerfully meaningful to us, and looking for our next place, because the Pale of Settlement in Europe, Poland and Russia and that area of the world has become inhospitable. But that's not the reason they left. They left because ideological zeal is becoming a thing again. and those who are ideologues make the move. And everyone back home says, oh my God, they're crazy. So the first wave of Aliyah, and people talk about 5 waves of Aliyah. We're going to go through all 5 right now. But the first one is the big most famous one, 1880 to about 1900. Okay? And in that wave of Aliyah, about 25,000 Jews move to the Promised Land, to Palestine. And again, you won't be able to make out great detail on your copies, but this sprinkling of little tiny settlements are the places that they established. And they arrive, you'll notice that a lot of it is up here in the Galilee. This is an area that was a backwater. It was swamplands, marshes. It was unusable for crops. Nobody lived there. It was owned by the Arabs, but the Jews started a concerted effort of legally purchasing land. And the documents for that purchase are still readily available. The Arabs thought they were getting a great deal. Who would buy this crap? They were happy to sell it and make some money. And they coexisted more or less comfortably. It was a very small number of Jews. The Arabs didn't understand us. We didn't really care or understand them. There was trade that went back and forth. There were skirmishes, but it wasn't terrible. We coexisted more or less. Moving forward to the Balfour Declaration. This is a document that many of you have probably heard of before, but this was in 1917. So this is the beginning of the British Mandate. The Ottoman Empire has crumbled with World War I. The British, having beaten the Ottomans, take over this part of the world, and the British Foreign Secretary, Arthur Balfour, publishes a letter to Lord Rothschild, who is a philanthropist and a major mover and shaker in global Jewish politics. And I don't know you can read it pretty easily up there. Here's the letter. And the indented part in the middle is the significant piece. Dear Lord Rothschild, I have much pleasure in conveying to you on behalf of His Majesty's government the following declaration of sympathy with Jewish Zionist aspirations, which has been submitted to and approved by the cabinet. Here it is. His Majesty's government view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people. Remember, this is long before World War II, the Holocaust, Nazis, all of that, okay? And will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object, it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country. I should be grateful if you would bring this declaration to the knowledge of the Zionist Federation. So this is, for the Zionists, a major win. We can't believe our luck. The British, really the only empire in the world at that point, sees and says and has published publicly that this land is a land that we can have. Now we have to pay attention to the ones who live there currently, and the population was really quite small. And it maintains the ability of us to maintain our identity in other countries, in Jews who live in other lands. So this is a great document for us, and we got very excited about it. Moving forward, I'm going to show you the next map. This is what the British and the French did in an agreement called the Pico something. I can't remember what it was called. Doesn't matter. The British and the French carved this up according to clearly, not arbitrary, but ethnically and geographically irrelevant lines. Yes, you've got sort of a natural border here with the Jordan River, and then from the Dead Sea, kind of more or less straight down to the Red Sea. But over here, this whole body is called Transjordan at that point. And it's given to the Hashemite kingdom, which is a small minority ruling party. The French are more or less in control of all of that stuff up there, Syria, Lebanon. I don't know if that was French or British. I thought that was British, actually. Anyway, point being, they weren't really considering who lived there currently. This is how they saw the future of this land, and the Balfour Declaration said that land over there that's labeled Palestine, that's going to be Jewish, and over here, Transjordan, that's going to be Arab. Okay. So moving forward to the next slide, now we've got a new concept. In the time between 1917 and 1945, the population, you know what, I skipped a couple more waves. Let me go backwards for just a minute, because I skipped some important pieces. Because the number, oops, I'm gonna go backwards, not forwards, there we go. So we were talking here about the first wave of Aliyah to 1900. A second wave of Aliyah started in 1904. This is because in the Pale of Settlement, things started getting really bad. There were what was known as the Kishinev pogroms that were devastating to us. I mean, you think October 7th was bad? It was, but it was nothing compared to what we were going through. Tens of thousands of Jews were being massacred. It was horrific. That was 1903. So in 1904, a whole lot more Jews start showing up in Israel. So in that next wave, which went from 1904 through 1915 or so, another 40,000 Jews arrive in Israel. So we had 25,000 to start with, another 40,000 arrive, and here now we have some numbers. They begin buying up land, and they purchased about 50,000 acres of land. The next thing we had was the Balfour Declaration in 1917, and in 1919, a third Aliyah takes shape. This one's more excited about things. Because of the Balfour Declaration, the positive energy around Israel, another 35,000 immigrants arrive. But then in 1924, because of, I'm showing you all kinds of stupid stuff, sorry. In 1924, in reaction to the US Immigration Act, which closed immigration to Jews, Jews diverted themselves to Israel. So the fourth Aliyah, starting in 24, went for the next 5 years to 1929. And in that window, another 80,000 Jews who are now fleeing Europe, many of them wanted to go to the US and couldn't. So they find themselves headed to Israel instead. And then the fifth Aliyah really begins in 1929 and continues through 1936 or somewhere around there, 1939. And that is a direct reaction to the rise of what became the Nazi Party. And that is really the exodus, for the lucky ones, from, I almost said from Egypt, from Europe. And in that window of time, there were another 35,000 who make their way to Israel. Now think about what I said before. When the Arabs were living right next door to our tiny little settlements, they were like sticks and mortar barely. It wasn't a big deal. But as we arrive in numbers like I just described to you over the course of those 5 aliyot, now we've got some serious numbers. Now the Arabs are saying, whoa, what is going on here? Suddenly, everywhere we look, there are Jews, there are Zionists. And the land that we've begun purchasing up is really beginning to encroach. And there becomes some serious pressure from Arab leaders. Arabs who are willing to legally sell land to Jews are powerfully criticized and ostracized. And the skirmishes between us begin to mount in seriousness and in frequency and in emotion. And now the Arab community and the Jewish community have a lot less easy time working together. Alan, you're gonna get a crick in your neck. Do you wanna scoot over a chair so you can just... Okay. So now we've got a really difficult dynamic going on. We've got a lot of Arabs living there and a lot of Jews living there, and the British are in control, and they can't make heads or tails out of us. They said to the Jews, you can have it, and then they reneged on the Broad Hall white paper, I think it was called. They kind of went back on their statement and said, well, we're going to kind of maintain status quo here. And so now you've got two angry people. You've got the Zionists who said, wait, you said we could have it. And you've got the Palestinians, again, not really, there's no national identity as Palestinian yet, but that doesn't matter. That's not the point. They're sitting there saying, wait a second, this is our ancestral homeland. We've been here for centuries. You know, what do you mean you're going to give the Zionists land here? This is ours. It's always been ours. And we're saying, wait a second, it was ours before it was yours. You understand the complexity here. They're both right. The British are getting crazed. They cannot maintain control. We have created a couple of militia, underground militia who are fighting, sometimes fighting each other, Jewish militia who have different beliefs about how to go about the next steps, fighting each other. But the British get fed up and say, ultimately, around 1948, that's it, we're out of here. Man, on May 14th, 1948, the British mandate over this land comes to an end. We're done. Good luck. What they do is they let what became the United Nations, the League of Nations, create what's known as the Partition Plan. So the next map that I showed you is the Partition Plan, and there are lots of presentations of this. This one is not great only because of the colors they chose. So I'm going to do my best to try to just paint with my finger what matters. They said, you two peoples, you both have a claim to the land. We get that. We're going to try to leave it as equitably as we can. We're going to carve it up, and we're going to let you share. And so very roughly, there are 4 segments of the land. The red ones, I believe, the red ones were meant to be for the Palestinians. The white ones were meant to be for the Jews. And so up here, there's an area for the Arabs. Over here and over here, kind of all the way down to here is for the Jews. Over here is for the Arabs. Over here is for the Arabs. And Jerusalem was to be an international city. Imperfect. Satisfying to nobody. But the Jews said, okay. And the Palestinians, the Arabs, went to war. So they rejected this and they said, we don't want this map. We don't think we should have to share. It's been ours. We want it. We're going to keep it. So the immediate response, the British end their mandate. The Jews immediately declare independence. They birth the modern state of Israel. And immediately, the Arabs declare war. And there were 5 Arab armies that all attacked Israel. And I don't know if I'll be able to get them all for us, but it included the Egyptians, the Syrians, the Jordanians, the Lebanese, and maybe I don't know if the Palestinians count, maybe that's the 5th one. Maybe, I don't know who it was. Anyway, 5 armies. And the stories, maybe some of you have read some of these dramatic stories of this war of independence. It is unbelievable how close it was. We barely won. It's staggering, within maybe hours of losing the war. And so as a result, we won the war of independence. This map never took shape. And instead, what emerged was the 1949 armistice law, lines, sorry. So this line is what's known as the Green Line. This is what the shape of Israel looked like after the War of Independence until 1967. And the reason it's called the Green Line is because at the end of the war, one of the Israeli generals who was kind of marking the final status of the map had on the table a map of the land, and he found himself nearby a green marker, and he traced out where the armies finished. And so now it's called the Green Line. Primarily, it refers to this part, not so much Gaza. So this dotted line that you see is the Green Line. And more or less today, that's still pretty much the shape of the West Bank. So you can see that it comes all the way down here in a big loop. It kind of cuts way back into Jerusalem, and then again kind of goes all the way up around the top here. And someone last time asked, what's the difference between the West Bank and Judea and Samaria? So Judea and Samaria are the words that ideologues or religious Zionists would use because they're the names that were given from the Bible. They are our way of demonstrating a claim, an ancient claim on this. So when we got to this land in, I don't know, the 1500 BCE, 1800 BCE, the people living up in this area were the Sumerians. So when we kicked them out, that land was called Samaria, and we populated it. So from Jerusalem downward, it's called Judea. That's where the tribe of Judah was settled. And if you look at an ancient map, you'll see this is Judah and Benjamin was down here. And then all the other tribes settled north of that. So everything north of Jerusalem that's in this West Bank area is known as Samaria. Most people in the world don't call it Judea and Samaria, but it's the same piece of land. If you call it that, there's a political message in your choice of words that lets people know where you stand on the matters of Israeli claim on the land. That make sense? Anyone wants any questions or anything there? So Amy asks, don't a lot of ultra-Orthodox call it Judea and Samaria? I'm going to say yes, but it's not because they're ultra-Orthodox. It has more to do with their political, their community's political stances. So, and it's not just ultra-Orthodox. It's also the Zionist, I keep returning to the word ideologues, but there's a word I want that I can't think of. The ones who believe with great political zeal that that land is ours. And by saying Judea and Samaria, that hearkens the notion that this is the promised land. This is land that God gave us. So who are we to relinquish it, to give it up? Now, we're going to return in a little while to the status of this land, the political status, the legal, internationally accepted status of this land, because it's really complicated. But when someone says Judea and Samaria, what they're saying is, I don't give a shit about what the international legal community says. God gave it to us. So, international law be damned. Okay, so this is the situation for Israel from 1948 until 1967. What this picture doesn't show you is that Jerusalem itself was a divided city. Like Berlin, there was a wall going right down the city's center. The Jews lived in West Jerusalem, the Arabs lived in East Jerusalem, and the old city, everything within the big walls, not the Kotel. I mean, that's not the wall I'm talking about. I'm talking about the city walls, the external side. Everything in the old city was Arab controlled. Now, the old city is broken into what they say is 4 quarters. They're not actually equal quarters, but the 4 populations in the old city are the Jewish quarter, the Christian quarter, the Arab quarter, and the Armenian quarter. During that window of time, someone do the math, I don't know how many years it is, 49 to 67, the Arabs destroyed everything in the Jewish quarter. They flattened it, which is interesting and a little bit of a kind of an upside for us. I'll explain in a little bit if I forget, someone remind me why it was not actually so bad. But it meant that Jews were not able to go into the old city at all. And just walking down the street of Jerusalem, if you're near that separation wall, it was dangerous. There was a no man's land in between that, and there were Jordanian snipers who were just for fun, firing over the wall. and it was really dangerous. So Jerusalem was a thoroughly divided city, but it was still a city that we lived in with great pride and with great conviction. I'm going to come back in a little while to a question asked last time about where are the truths around the expulsion of Arabs who lived in West Jerusalem, the part of the city that now the Jews held. And I'll have some data on that in a few minutes. In 1967, tensions are rising again. There's really very little settlement in the West Bank of Jewish population, but it's clear that the tensions are rising. And just like, in recent history, where we can see, well, let's go the other direction. As October 7th has taken shape, and you can see that Israel is mounting an attack. It's getting ready. Everyone knows it's coming any day now. The tanks are lining up around the borders of Gaza. The troops have been schlepped in. Everything's ready. Everyone knows that could be today, could be tomorrow, who knows? That's exactly the case in May of 1967. Everybody knows that the Arabs on all sides of Israel are going to attack. No secret here. So early in the morning on May something, June, someone will know, 1967, Israel preemptively attacks and obliterates the air forces of the Arab armies, primarily Egypt, but just caught them completely unprepared. And that, in that way, the decisiveness of the 6-day war is still studied in war colleges as an almost inexplicable, which borders right up against the word miracle, example of what warfare can look like. And so because of the shocking rapidity and success of the Jews in this war, it encouraged a further fervor. Some of you may remember what it was like to kind of watch that happen in 1967. I don't. Sorry, couldn't help myself. But I mean, there were a lot of Jews that I understand were looking for ways to hop on a plane and get to Israel before the war began, because they knew that this was an existential moment, that it was not going to be just a little defeat. If the Arabs overtook us, it was going to be another Holocaust. It was going to be a genocide, because that's what we were pretty sure was on their minds. So the fact that we won was a shock, probably more to us than to anyone else. But as a result of having won that, we expanded our territory pretty significantly. So I'm going to go to the next slide here. And this is the shape of Israel now after 67. Actually, I should change my language. I just said it's the shape of Israel. Israel is still the white area in the middle. All the other lands that are in pink or whatever color that is, those are lands that we took control of, but did not annex, at least not right away. So what you see as significant is this whole West Bank area was Jordan until 67. From 1948 until 67, it was Jordan. And we pushed them back to the banks of the Jordan River. This whole area here is the west bank of the Jordan River. That's where the name comes from. This whole area here got the Gaza Strip. We took control of. We pushed Syria up and over the Golan Heights. It's named the Heights because it is literally a plateau, and strategically, it's an incredibly valuable spot to hold. It was a very difficult theater of combat during 67. But during the years pre-67, in those decades, all the farmers, remember I showed you up here is where we were settling. It's still kind of the breadbasket of Israel. The settlers were living up here, farming and living beautiful, idyllic, ideological lives, But the Syrians were just hanging out up on the Golan Heights, and again, just lobbing artillery, mortar, sniper shots with no schedule, with no hesitance down on the Jews. So this was a really important front for the Jews to succeed in, and we did. And as Egypt came across the Sinai Peninsula as a part of that war, we pushed them all the way back to the Suez Canal because it was important that they not close the Suez Canal to Israeli interests. So Israel took control of the entire Sinai Peninsula. So look at how much acreage suddenly came under Israeli control. Yeah, Alan.
So the last comment that you made about it was important for them not to hold the Suez Canal, is that to imply that they theoretically could push them back even further?
So Alan asks, is it theoretical that Israel could have pushed even further? The answer is a definitive sure, but one of the principles that Israel is pretty careful to uphold, with some important exceptions, is the name of their army. It's called Tzva L'Haganah Yisrael, the Israel Defense Force. It is designed as nothing more than a homeland defense. Israel doesn't go on, that's a good word, offensive, that's the word I was also looking for. Offensive wars, trying to claim more territory. The exact nature of what Russia has done to Ukraine. Israel doesn't do that. So there have been a couple times where Israel had to slow itself down. They could have absolutely gone right into Damascus, which is, over here somewhere. And they really had to slow themselves down. Currently, we are bombing Beirut. We have gone past this line here, past the 20-kilometer buffer zone that is supposed to be a UN-controlled demilitarized zone. We've gone way past that because now we're targeting Hezbollah, and Hezbollah is in Beirut. And so, hold on one second, Shel. So there's that. And then again, when we got to the Suez Canal, there were voices that said, let's keep going. And luckily, calmer minds said, no, this was our objective. We met our objective. Slow down. In 67, another major front was Jerusalem. And this is a moment that went into the annals of Israeli mythology when, what's the general's name? Moshe Dayan calls up on the radio and says, HaKotel b'yadenu. The Kotel, the Western Wall, the Wailing Wall, b'yadenu, is in our hand. And it was a proclamation that for the first time in, I don't know how long, certainly in the 23 years, whatever it was, since the formation, but probably much longer than that. For the first time, Jews were standing at the Western Wall and putting their hands on the wall. And there are great pictures of these soldiers who have just fought their way into Jerusalem, standing at what we now feel is one of our holiest sites, period. Sheldon?
Now, wasn't there at a time Lebanon was supposed to be a Christian country, and the Arabs and the Christians, there was a lot of, until the UN sort of allowed the Christian militias to be overrun by the Arabs and they were forced out of Lebanon?
So I'm going to share later tonight a resource that is better than me at the intricacies of history in that part of the world. But there's an episode that I'm going to recommend you all listen to about Sabra and Shatila, which are mentioned repeatedly as the sites of massacres that the Jews are responsible for. And what was really happening in those spaces was that the Jews were in control of that area, but that we let the Christians, the phalangists, go into the Arab refugee camps, ostensibly to root out whatever terrorists still were there. But while we were apparently unaware of what was happening in there, they were slaughtering. And it's a really dark stain on Israel's character. Lots of research been done into it, but the relationship between the minority Christian ruling party in Lebanon and the majority Arab ruled party population is really complex. So yes, there's a significant Christian population in Lebanon, but it's still the minority. Yeah, Michelle.
You may be planning to address this, but one thing you said earlier was important, I think, about they annexed the land, but they didn't. Like I've never actually understood that. Like, why
Sure.
didn't that just become part of Israel?
Great,
Why did
great.
they annex it or?
So the only part of this whole picture that has been annexed is the Golan Heights. And we said, that's ours now. We're making that Israel.
I must admit, I probably don't even understand
Yep.
the difference between annexing
Yep.
something and
So let me,
okay.
I didn't either. And I'm really glad you said that because you're not the only one in the room. To annex something means we claim it. This land here and here, which are still the two hot zones, they are Israeli administered lands, but they're not Israel. They're not part of Israel proper. The people that live there are not citizens of Israel. They're not, they don't claim Israeli rights. They're not in Israel. And that's important. Why wouldn't Israel want to claim the West Bank? Because there are like, I don't know, there were at the time something like, I don't know, 400,000 Palestinians living there. If it's a Jewish state, you have to wrestle with a couple of issues here. And this is part of where the conversation around the word apartheid rises. And I just listened the other day to this podcast that I told you I was going to tell you about, and he does a magnificent job. He had to do it in 2 episodes because it's so complex, explaining why legally Israel is not an apartheid state. And the reason it comes down to is that this is not Israel. Yes, there are different administrative techniques and systems to oversee the people who live there. And over in Gaza is even different further again, because Israel pulled all the way out and said, we're not here at all. That was in 2005. Now, there's some problems with that I'll state right now. You can say you don't control these lands or that these lands are not yours, but Israel has not permitted free-flowing movement between Gaza and Israel for goods or labor, or even for basic needs like food and electricity and water and things like this. So when Israel pulled out of Gaza and said, we're done, we're washing our hands of Gaza, not one Jew is going to live there, you elect whoever you want, and in 2007, I think, Hamas was democratically elected the ruling party. We said, you want Hamas? Take Hamas. That would have worked if it had actually been a functional country, but it never really was. It doesn't have any port, it doesn't have any airport, there's no way for it to connect with the rest of the world. So I've always felt that Israel is accountable in that respect. Similarly with the West Bank, but we'll get to that in a little bit. West Bank is really complicated. Okay, can I go on a little bit more? Terrific. So in 1980, well, it was actually before 82, but we'll just show the map in 82. Israel made peace with Egypt. That was the first country for Israel to normalize relationships with, for an Arab country to say, we recognize the state of Israel. And Anwar Sadat got on a plane and flew over to Israel, which was crazy. I mean, I just can't even imagine that today. A big piece of that peace treaty was us giving them back the Sinai Peninsula. We didn't want it. There's no meaningful sites there for us other than Mount Sinai, but no one knows where that is anyway. And so now well, not today, but when I was living in Israel, the only thing that mattered about the Sinai Peninsula is it's got great vacation spots. So, lots of young Israelis would travel all the way down to Eilat and then cross over the open border of, Dahab into the Sinai Peninsula, and then all the way down the coast of the Red Sea. You've got tiny little cities like Sharm el-Sheikh and a whole bunch of other names I can't remember. And I loved going there. I'd go there, I went there several times. In fact, that's where I proposed to Julie, was down in the Sinai Peninsula. So that is where the shape begins to change again. Now we've given back the Sinai Peninsula, and there is an international border here again, okay? Now, right here, the space where Egypt proper connects with Gaza is a tricky spot, because another branch of Islamic fundamentalism is known as the Islamic Brotherhood. It's not the same as Hamas, but there are elements. And Egypt is a fairly liberal government relative to other notions of caliphate. And so within Egypt, the Islamic Brotherhood are monsters, they're terrorists. And so the Islamic Brotherhood and Hamas have a lot of go-between. So Egypt does not want this border with Gaza open. They also, frankly, don't want the Palestinians coming and flowing into to their country. So a lot of the tunnels that you've heard, in fact, most of the tunnels that you've heard about in the news, cross over this little area here, right under the border, because it's the easiest way for the Palestinians to smuggle in building materials, food, other resources, and of course, weapons. But in many ways, that is kind of the supply chain of the black market. Other tunnels, for very different reasons, also go under the border of Gaza into Israel. But that's, those serve a very different purpose. Yeah, Everett.
Did the October 73 conflict have no geographical impact? You didn't reference it, and I was just wondering why.
So you're right, that was the Yom Kippur War. I didn't show any maps because it didn't really change the shape of the country. You're right. That was, in many ways, I'll mention it for a moment. Like October 7th, the Yom Kippur War was an embarrassment for Israel. The country has always prided itself on its intelligence, on its ability to outthink and outsmart those who would destroy it. And there are endless examples we can all think of that demonstrate that that is our track record, that we have good ground on which to claim that. But every country has some moments where they drop the ball. And, on October 7th, we all said, where the hell was the Israeli Defense Force? They were across the country. How did they not know that this kind of thing was happening? It was the same kind of thing with the Yom Kippur War. There was intelligence that was noted by lower level officers, and it was sent up the line, but it was snuffed out, so that it led to an attack that, again, was existential, and we very nearly lost. And as a result, interestingly, there are also episodes on this. There's a system put in place in the Israeli Defense Force in which you can report observations and go and break the chain of command to go above your commanding officer without penalization if you believe that there's something there that needs to be said. And it can be around intelligence information or other elements as well. But it's kind of like a whistleblower law of some sort for the Israeli soldiers, because in the Yom Kippur War, it wouldn't have been as bad. Maybe it could have been avoided if what was noted by those junior officers had been heeded.
The only benefit was that it was turned around.
Yeah, right. We learned something from it, exactly. Okay. So in 1981, we begin the First Intifada. This is where Israel invaded north of its borders into Lebanon. Hezbollah had been just attacking with abandon. There was no deterrent for that. And as a result, the populations in Israel the Arab populations were incredibly angry. And the popular uprising was, what's it called when you've got one side that's very powerful and one side that's throwing rocks? I can't remember what. There's an expression for a conflict that's disproportionate. Asymmetrical. Thank you, Aaron. That's it. Thank you. So asymmetry of the Intifada was a PR nightmare for Israel. And unfortunately, because of the nature of the populations, Israel continues to lose the PR battle. And perception is an important part of reality. I have said endlessly, and will continue to say to anyone who will pause, that the IDF is, in my opinion, the most ethical and honest army in the world, probably in the history of the world. It has mistakes, it has failures for sure, but I can't imagine the kinds of occurrences happening in other countries and being tolerated and handled with the kind of restraint and humanity that the IDF insists upon. I can't picture that taking place in very many other places in the world. So I maintain a great deal of awe and esteem for the IDF. Yeah, Alan? Yeah. Sure, thank you. Alan asks, what does the word caliphate mean? So within Islamic Sharia law, there would be a governmental ruler known as a caliph, probably akin to what we're calling the Ayatollah, the supreme leader in Iran, a religiously minded leader who rules the kingdom based on Islamic law. And the examples of extremist populations that come to mind over the last 20 years, 40 years, of radical Islamists, they dream of a caliphate. Gosh, I want to say, okay, in the same way, no, not the same way. Similar to the way that you might have extreme Christian views that really wish that this country was ruled by Christians who saw things the way they do. Or I was going to say Israel as a Jewish state, but Israel has always maintained almost a separation of church and state. Religious matters are controlled by the rabbinate in Israel. The government of Israel is theoretically secular, even though it's a Jewish state. But the caliphate is going to be a dream for Islamists who want to see that their kingdom is run according to the way they've interpreted Islamic law. No, I mean, they're sort of like, I mean, their dream is like empires. I don't think there really are any caliphates that exist currently, not really. But the Taliban wanted a caliphate. And so they were looking to oust the secular government as they viewed it, and to take over administration of the land as far as they felt necessary, ethnically as far as they cared to go. I don't know. I actually don't know the answer to that question. I'm going to keep going, Shell, if it's okay.
ISIS was the last one to declare caliphate.
Yeah, thank you. That's true. Yeah. Yeah.
And I was just going to, I don't know if you agree, but it's almost based on spirituality and legal law, what makes and defines that country. The area they want to rule.
So what I'm going to show you now is an important map because it still has enormous significance and impact today. So the Oslo Accords were the closest we came to establishing a final status solution with the Palestinians around how can we coexist. This was a part of the two-state solution, 2 states for 2 people. And we would figure out a way to peacefully disengage from each other so that we could each go our own separate ways with, shared understandings. Now, this could only happen after Yasser Arafat evolved from being a terrorist into a statesman. He was never a good statesman. It's always said that Arafat never missed an opportunity to miss an opportunity. And so this is something that Ehud Barak was working on, and Yitzhak Rabin is working on a status that can function. Now, why didn't we just say, you can have this land? Because in the intervening years, a lot of Jews, ideological settlers, said, we can't give up that land. And how do we ensure that doesn't happen? By creating facts on the ground. And so settlements become the way to do that. Now, the biggest settlement it's basically a neighborhood of Jerusalem. It's called Ma'ale Adumim. It's, you can see it from Jerusalem, and it's a huge city. I don't remember the last numbers, someone will Google it, but I think there's something like 50,000 people who live there. It's not like a little hilltop enclave, it's a city with all the infrastructure. So if you were gonna say, like we did in Gaza, we're just done, we're gonna leave, you would have to dismantle hundreds of thousands at this point. I'll give you some numbers in a few, on the next couple slides. You'd have to dismantle this, and it's totally unrealistic. Plus, all those people are going to be really upset. Did anybody have the chance to hear our last Shaliach, Yoav, talk about when Israel pulled out of Gaza? Yoav, a young man, grew up in Gaza. His family lived in one of the few Jewish settlements there. And in 2005, when Israel said, we're done, we're out, we're gone, the Israeli Defense Force had to physically pick up people and carry them out. They didn't destroy anything. They left it all for the Palestinians. And as soon as we stepped out the back door, the Palestinians came in and destroyed everything that we had built. We left it for them to live in and to be well. But Yoav remembers the day that his family, he was not being physically carried out by soldiers, but his neighbors were. They were saying, we don't want to leave our homes. So now we have a lot of Israelis who've chosen to live in the West Bank because of primarily two reasons. Number one, it's three reasons. Number one is religious Zionists. Number two are political settlers. We believe in the political right of us to have this land. And number three, perhaps the largest group, are the economic settlers. Israel, at least several governments of Israel, has wanted to create facts on the ground. And so they give great incentives to Israelis, tax incentives and low housing costs to move into the West Bank. And so they give lots and lots and lots of building permits to Jews to build in the West Bank. But ultimately, at this point, it would be impossible for us to disengage and move all of those people out of the West Bank back into Israel proper. So in Oslo, the idea was this: we're going to break up the West Bank into three categories of land, areas A, B, and C. Areas A are the little tiny blue spots all over, and those are completely Palestinian-controlled areas with Palestinian police officers, Palestinian governments, Palestinian municipality function, and they include the cities whose names you know: Hebron, Bethlehem, Ramallah, Jenin, Jericho. Oh no, not Jericho. Excuse me, Nablus, and a few others whose names you might know. The second area were Area B. Now, Area B was Palestinian land. Sorry, Jews can't go into Area A, still today. Jews cannot go in. Area B, Jews theoretically can go in with a permit, but never do. These are Palestinian areas, but they are administered by Israel. The Israeli Defense Force defines them. That's all the orange spots. It encompasses thousands of little villages. And then Area C are the areas where the Jews do live, and they are completely controlled by Israel. But again, they're not Israel. And that's important. These are lands that the international community recognizes as not Israel. It's within all of this area that the rest of the world talks about illegal settlements because they don't think that Israel has the right to build anything there. It is so. One of the expressions I've heard that I like is that these are disputed territories, and that's I think a true term. They're disputed. We haven't figured out an answer to it yet. We don't. We're still disputing. So part of why Arafat says that he rejected Oslo ultimately was because all of these areas are disconnected and the roads in between them are controlled by Israel. And still today, the checkpoints pop up and disappear every day. You don't know where there's going to be checkpoints. And to get from one place to another can take you 8 hours when it should have only taken you 20 minutes. And if you're having a baby in this area and you need to get to the hospital in Hebron, it's an uncertainty. And it really wasn't a functional model. And so that's their argument for saying, no, thank you, we turn this down. By the way, another part of Oslo was we were going to give them roughly 94% of the landmass of the West Bank. And we were going to give them 6% of Israel to make up for it. And, again, they said, no, thank you. Yeah.
Rabbi,
Yeah, go ahead.
are there important cultural, psychological differences between the Israeli forces or peoples and the Arabs that it's important to know about as we think about how this all has been unfolding?
You're asking about what kind of differences, cultural and ethnic?
Cultural or psychological between the Israelis, like the concept that I heard many years ago, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Are their belief systems, not just it belongs to me and it belongs to me, but are there any major belief systems, maybe that's another way to say it, differences that need to be considered to understand this?
Thanks, Joan. It's a great question. I'm going to remind you of what I said at the beginning of the first session, which is everything I say with bias. I can't do otherwise. So what I'll answer is with my bias. Since 1948, with enormous stresses on every side, Israel has gone on to create a state. They've built, they've grown, they've developed, they're living for the future. We called that the War of Independence, and the Palestinians call that war the Nakba, the catastrophe. And the psychology of having lost that war, I think, has affected all of the Palestinians in important ways, and it's radicalized many. And of course, we've heard so many times that, sure, you might be rooting out Hamas right now in Gaza, but you're creating the Hamas of 20 years from now by creating so much pain for the people living there. So again, I'm going to get to numbers on the next slide, but whether or not they were living as a small number of people in the West Bank in 1948 or not, all the people in the West Bank, and certainly all the hundreds of thousands of refugees who still live in refugee camps all the way around Israel, in Lebanon and in Syria and in Jordan, these are humans who were never given the next step. We now have fourth-generation families, children whose great-grandparents moved into a refugee camp. How long should a refugee camp exist? These are major settlements now, and I've been in a couple, and they're not nice places. They're not the kind of place that you would look around and say, I'm so happy to be here. And so if I'm answering Joan's question, I'm going to say something along the lines of the Israelis have to give a couple years of their life to go serve in the army. And these young people, 18 years old, 20 years old, they know that they're defending the lives of lots of their own people. The Palestinians, bias. The Palestinians appear to live in a constant state of desperation. Now, life is not equally bad for all Palestinians. And we haven't even talked yet about Israeli Arabs. That's a whole different group of people. But for Palestinians, there hasn't been a lot of reason for hope. I haven't seen that there have been a lot of examples where they can say, maybe there's a light at the end of this tunnel. And most of the abuse, if I'm being biased and honest, seems to come from their own leadership. So it's hard for me to know culturally what a Palestinian feels, other than what seems to be the case for the interviews you hear and I know that there are lots of peace activists within the Palestinian people. I've met some, and I've listened to interviews and watched organizations that reach deep into the Palestinian community to find peace partners. But they're grassroots, and those folks on the Palestinian side have to do so in anonymity because it's dangerous to be seen as working with the Zionists. Joan, does that
Thank you.
that help a little bit? Okay. So let's talk for a few minutes. You guys have a little koach. Are you okay? Is everyone hanging in there? I know this is a lot of me talking. I don't usually lecture quite like this. We're going to go through some demographics because I think it'll be helpful for you to get a landscape of how this all kind of lays out. So this is from the Bureau of Statistics. This is Israel's official census information. So as of December 2023, the population stands at about 9.8 million. This is within Israel proper. This does not include the West Bank. Those are not Israelis.
Including the settlers. The settlers are not considered Israelis?
No, that's a good question. The settlers, hold on a second. No, it's actually a really good question. It does include the settlers. The settlers are Jews who are citizens of Israel living outside Israel. Thank you, that's important. So of that 9.8 million, 73% are Jews. And that includes here about 500,000 who are living over the borders of Israel in the West Bank. Okay? So only 73% of the state of Israel's population are Jews. So who are the others? So about 20%, 21%, are Israeli citizens that are classified differently as Arab or Druze. And not all Israeli Arabs, by the way, consider themselves Palestinian. That's a political statement. And it has a lot to do with, what kind of job you might get. You can decline Israeli citizenship, but then you're declining all the privileges that come with a modern first world country's privileges. Israeli Arabs, they vote. They have members of Knesset representing them in the government. They have access to university, to all the jobs out there. Now, that's not to say there isn't racism and some segregation, but it's not state-sponsored. It's not apartheid. They have equal rights to the court systems. Now, if you go into an Israeli Arab village right next to a Jewish village, you're going to visually see differences. They don't live at the same level of economic privilege that the Jews do. That's an issue. That's a real issue. In the same way that if you went into a poor black village in America, you'd say, wait a second, these are Americans too. Why do the people in Stamford or North Stamford get to enjoy privilege that people in downtown Stamford don't? Those are the same kinds of questions the Israelis wrestle with. In addition, in this 20%, there are other populations known as Druze. I have no idea who that is. And then other kinds of Muslims and Christians and Armenians. There aren't very many Armenians anymore.
We don't have a Kurdish population in there as well?
I don't know. Not that I've ever heard of. Yeah, I don't know. So then of the remaining, another 5%, which is 500,000 people, that includes people who see themselves as Jewish, but are not recognized by Jewish law. So they're residents, but they're not citizens. Non-Jewish family members. So if you make aliyah with your non-Jewish partner, you're a citizen. They are not. They can't become citizens in that way. Christians, like, the Christians, the ones, not Arab Christians. Those Arab Christians are counted in this 20%. But like, the Christians, they like living in the Holy Land, the Christians. I know. And then everyone else, kind of just a catch-all. So I just want you to see today how the population of Israel is overwhelmingly Jewish, but if they were to grant Palestinians the right of return, that would mean that every Arab out there who wants to come back would be able to become a citizen. And I haven't done the numbers yet for those folks, but that would overwhelm the Jewish population. So that's where the question gets really hard, because you can either be a Jewish state or a democratic state, but you can't be both. If you have more Palestinians or more Arabs than Jews, it's no longer a Jewish state, unless you subjugate them and take away rights so that you don't count them as citizens. Then you maintain the Jewishness, but you've sacrificed the democracy. That's a big issue for Israel. They're really trying to figure out, who are we? How do we maintain who we are? And Netanyahu pushed through that damn nation state law a couple years ago with this right-wing government, stating much more radically the Jewish nature and really restricting the opportunity for non-Jews to feel a part of the country, including taking away the legal status of Arabic as one of the 3 national languages. There's 3 recognized legal languages we only have one here, as far as I know. I don't think Spanish is one of our legal languages. Many of our documents are in Spanish as well. It's not, right? It's not an official. But in Israel, there are 3 official languages. So every road sign is in Hebrew, Arabic, and English. And so, nation state took away a lot of that. So I'm going to keep going a little bit further. So now we're looking at some of the territories. So Jerusalem is still an unofficially, or I guess it's officially, divided city. But there's no wall anymore, and Jews can go anywhere they want, and Arabs can go anywhere they want. So an East Jerusalem Arab can just walk across the city to the Jewish side. And I want you to try to imagine for a moment how tenuous the reality is for Israeli Arabs. Because on the one hand, they can't be seen as being in lockstep with Zionists. The Zionists, however, have made their lives better than almost anywhere else in the Arab world. It's a pretty good life if you're an Arab looking at your cousins over in the West Bank. And so on the one hand, they don't want to look too supportive of the Zionist entity. On the other hand, they don't want to be too much trouble. So there actually are not very many attacks, suicide or knife attacks, that come from East Jerusalem. That would be foolish. That would be self-undermining. The attacks come from Gaza and the West Bank. So Israel, I should go back a couple slides. Oops. There we go. So Israel built what's called the separation barrier. And it's a fairly tall wall. I think it's 9 meters high. It's high. It's a big concrete wall in most places, but it's a security fence in other places. But it completely closes off much of this border. And as soon as they did that, the prevalence, the rate of suicide attacks plummeted because they couldn't get in anymore. And at the same time, what they did was they closed off access to most Palestinians for their jobs in Israel proper. If there's a wall, you can't get to your migrant farmer job. It also, in choosing the path of that wall, didn't follow the green line in every case. And so there are a lot of examples where Palestinians were cut off from their own land. Now their olive groves are on the other side of the wall, and they're done, they're out. I mean, they just lost their land. So there's not a lot of those examples, but they're important. Israel made choices in how it built its wall. It had to protect its citizens, and it worked. You know, there are far fewer. I mean, remember back in like 2001, I was there from 98 to 2000, and then it got bad from 2000 to 2002. It was really bad. That was the second Intifada, and the bombing attacks were horrific. They were all over the place. You did not know if you were going to come home that day. When I went back in 2003 for my first year of seminary, it was still really scary. The wall was beginning to be built, and it was contentious, but Israel was doing it. And I heard several suicide attacks. Thank God I was never near one, but I could hear them. I heard the bangs, and then heard the sirens, and then, within an hour, heard the news reports of how many people were killed. I mean, it was scary. They issued us all gas masks. We had to walk around all the time with our gas masks because Iran was threatening chemical attacks. Living as an Israeli is not easy either. So let me jump forward again to some more demographics, because I think they're important for you to get numbers to picture. So East Jerusalem today has 200,000 Israelis and 250,000 Arabs. This is difficulty. This is hard, because the people in East Jerusalem who are not Israeli citizens are not citizens of any country. They are people without a land, and so they can't get a passport from any country. The West Bank Palestinians in Gaza, they can get Palestinian passports. There are such a thing, and Israel allows them to be used. But there are people without a country, and that's a weird no man's land. It means they have no representation. This would be maybe the small category of people where there's a discussion to be had about apartheid. These are people who are, again, they're not Israeli citizens, but they live within Israel's borders, and they don't have access to the court system. They're not administered by the police. They're administered by the army and subject to Israeli military law. So that's a complication.
Is that because of how they were absorbed into Israel? Like, so that Israeli Arabs are citizens because they chose to be, like what, or the timing was different? Like, what is the...
Yeah, good question. So most of the Israeli Arabs live in Arab villages that are completely in the middle of Israel. They're just right next door to all the Jewish villages. They were always there, they're still there, and they were given citizenship. At 1948. Yep, exactly. I don't actually know. I know that in many cases the East Jerusalem Palestinians turn down Israeli citizenship, but I also know that there's a lot of people who will work very hard and submit application year after year after year to try to gain Israeli citizenship, and it's apparently very difficult. And so I don't really know the politics around who's gotten it, who wants it, who rejects it. Very complicated. Again, that podcast is going to be helpful. In the West Bank, I don't know what number I used before. I think I may have said 500,000. I was a little over, but there are about 420,000 Jews, settlers in the West Bank. Up in the Golan Heights, that's us now. But it's an empty place. It's eerie. There's a couple of big cities. There's Katsrin and can't think of the other one. Galilee is a region. I can't. I'll find it. But anyway, otherwise, it's very empty. It's very quiet up there. It's pretty. But you can't go very far because all the roads have fences on either side telling you not to step off the road because it's an active minefield. The Syrians left all their landmines when we pushed them out. So, yeah. And then we talked about this before too. The census numbers do not include the Arabs who live in the West Bank and Gaza. Okay, so now here's one more little page of numbers. This is from the Israel Policy Forum. Again, I consider that to be a reliable source of numbers. This is not like Al Jazeera or something. So according to them, there are, again, 450,000 Jews in the West Bank, and Between 20,000 and 30,000 on top of that live in those illegal settlement outposts. And these are bizarre places. I've been to a couple of them. These are nut jobs who walk around with weapons on their shoulder, who are largely not ultra-Orthodox, but fanatically Orthodox, and who are, who see themselves as freedom fighters. And so they live in that area C, and this is what is considered an illegal outpost. And sometimes you'll see on the news that Israel goes in, physically removes the people, and bulldozes the trailers that they have up.
The American West?
Yeah, it is kind of.
It's the American West.
So here, this is what I was saying before, given that Israel has not annexed the West Bank, those settlements in the territory are not considered to be Israel under its sovereignty. And so we were talking before about how many of the settlers are ultra-Orthodox. Only, it says, I didn't really know this, about a third of them are Haredim, ultra-Orthodox. Another third are secular. Those are the ones who probably who went there for economic advantages. And the final third are the religious Zionists, the ones I described a moment ago, who are nut jobs. Okay, so before I go on, I'm going to share some resources now that I think are of good value. Anybody want to ask anything? Again, I threw a lot of material at you. And you can come back to me tomorrow or next month and ask. Yeah, Everett?
Just a quick, when Trump moved the embassy into Jerusalem, he made some kind of declaration on the West Bank.
I don't remember it including the West Bank, but when Trump moved the embassy, it was the first time that the US acknowledged that Jerusalem was the recognized capital of Israel. Until then, all they had there was a consulate, actually two consulates, one for West Jerusalem for the Jews and a different one in East Jerusalem for the Arabs. When he moved it, what he did was he made a lot of Jews very happy, but what he did was he unilaterally disrupted the status quo. And until decisions or agreed upon balanced outcomes had been reached, Jerusalem was still a city that was a tipping point. It's a what's the word? A fire.
There's a word.
Yeah. Anyway, so in doing so, he deeply upset the Arab world, but made a lot of Jews really happy and got them to vote for him again. Okay, so I talked on Yom Kippur about myths and having to rewrite myths. Mythology is valuable. It helps us know who we are. Our Torah is important, sacred mythology. The stories of the early Zionist settlers are important Jewish mythology. And the formation of the state and the early years through 67 are important Jewish mythology. Mythology often has a tenuous relationship with reality. And so it is important for a people to be honest about its stories and to accept facts even when they're uncomfortable. And only in the last, I'm going to say 20 years, have we begun to see Israeli historians taking over the narrative based on demonstrable, researchable fact to tell a more accurate version of the story. And there are a couple of really important examples that are worth your time if you haven't already experienced them. So the first one I put up here on the screen was Ari Shavit's book. He is a wildly respected Israeli journalist, and his family goes back pre-state. And so he has the esteem, the respect to be able to say hard things. And so as he kind of tells the story of Israel through the lens of his family and where they were and what they experienced and how the story was told, but what he's finding as he does more research, it was hard for all of us to read. But it was also refreshing because we knew that, the stories of Leon Uris's what's it called? What was his? Exodus, thank you. You know, we knew that there had to be more to the story than that. We keep hearing things on the news that don't sound like what that looked like. So this is a beautiful and historically respected new book, relatively new. Noa Tishby is an Israeli actress and now activist. She came to LA and began to make a pretty successful career of movies. And she has written this book on Israeli history because she wasn't feeling like anyone was presenting it in a way that felt reliable and honest. This is in defense of Israel, and yet it's also really honest. I really strongly recommend this book. I really love it. I've read it a couple times, actually. Here's a podcast that I have been listening to now for a couple of years. I think his name is Noam Katz or something, but it's called Unpacking Israeli History. The episodes are anywhere from 30 to 60 minutes usually. He has on some guests sometimes, but he's an academic. He's a teacher, and he's a committed Jew. And he does better than anyone I've ever come across. He does the job of presenting as close to an unbiased, or at least a dually biased presentation of the chapters of Jewish history from both sides. And I'm astounded because I've never experienced anything like it before. It is so good that I can't emphasize it enough. I read the Times of Israel. It's biased, it's Jewish, but it's pretty good, as long as you understand its bias. Sometimes I read Al Jazeera, because it's helpful to see what they have to say about the same things. On my Amazon Alexa morning flash briefing, or whatever it's called, after I listen to the BBC and the New York Times, I have the Times of Israel's daily briefing. And it's fairly long. It's like 30 minutes usually, but it's what's going on today in the news. And it's good. I mean, it was really helpful for me during that whole window of time before 10/7 when we were trying to understand what the hell is going on with this judicial reform thing in Israel. Like, they did a great job of really helping us walk through and understand what was going on. And so I like this a lot as well. And then I wanted to bring another book, but all my books are still packed up in my boxes, so I couldn't. But I have a great book that I would show you called One Land, Two People, or something like that, or One Land, Two Stories. And it's written by two academics in Denver. One of them I was friends with, a Jew, but he had a colleague who was a Palestinian, and together they wrote this book. And it goes through in chapters each episode of Israeli history from, I think it starts with the independence, but it might go further back than that. And for each chapter of Israeli's history, the War of Independence, the Six-Day War, the Yom Kippur War, the Intifada, Oslo, for each one of those, they each, as historians, tell the story from their point of view. And so each chapter has on the side, it's kind of cool, it's like color-coded. You've got the Jewish version and the Palestinian version of the same story. And it's hard. It's hard to read. I mean, it will challenge you when you read Shaul. Yeah, I'll have to find the name of it. I'll put that in the material as well when I send out a recap tonight. Yeah, Glenn?
Are there any intersections in the story? You make it seem sort of parallel. For example, what you just said.
Yeah. Glenn's asking, are there any intersections? Well, here's how I think I would answer that. There are lots and lots and lots of intersections, but they happen way down low where they're not usually seen. It is my fervent belief. Bias. I'm a bleeding heart liberal. I believe in my soul that most of the Palestinians only want a future with opportunity for their kids, just like us. I really do believe that. And if they had access to that, I don't think that they would need to hate us. I understand why they hate us. I get it. But the intersections that are beautiful happen where there are opportunities for real people to see each other and to interact. We have a circle here at Sinai called Women Wage Peace, and it's one of many examples of Israeli women who are liaising with Palestinian women, but the Palestinians have to be anonymous. They cannot be caught communicating with these Jews. And together, actually, I learned this recently, that the UN created a resolution, I think it's like 1427 or something like that, and it is a statement declaring that if peace is going to come to the world, it's going to be at the hands of women. Men are not going to create peace. I couldn't believe that the UN actually published that. I thought it was fabulous. So these women are basing their belief on that, and they're working together. I wanted to take, in the worst way, a mission in March of this past year. I wanted to go on a trip with a group of rabbis and imams from America, because they had a whole trip and the itinerary was magnificent. It was like a 7-day trip maybe, and we were going to go, and they went, I couldn't go. They went from organization like I just described to organization to organization to organization. There are so many examples of intersection, but not in the Knesset, not in the UN.
See, so these are stories that really on the ground that you don't see and read.
Yeah. When I first came to town here, Glenn's saying that, for people at home, Glenn's saying, these are stories you don't see or read. You're right. When I first came to town here, early on in the first couple of years, I brought in a pair of speakers. I think one of them was virtual, the other was in person. It was called Combatants for Peace. And this group sends speakers all over the world in pairs, one Jew and one Palestinian, who were combatants. So that means that the Jew was in the IDF and the Palestinian was some kind of freedom fighter, either a terrorist or throwing rocks or what, but they were a combatant. And now at this point in each of their personal journeys, they're ready to fight for something different. And so they've paired up in teams and they go all over the world talking about how this is what I thought, this is what I was told was right. And I see more now. The stories are everywhere. So yeah, it's important for us to take a little bit of hope in the fact that humans are humans, but they can be poisoned with hatred. Who's the author?
One Land, Two Cities, Levine. Is that it?
No, that's not it.
That's not it?
I knew that I had to. Try One Land, Two Peoples or something like that. Maybe that's it.
There's just one thing I'd like to mention, and that is the whole right of return thing.
Yeah.
And, I hear, when we had the people that had gone over after 10/7, that panel here.
Yeah.
Somebody talked about a Palestinian who had seen a picture of the Israeli woman's beautiful house and said, and the Israeli said, well, maybe your husband can build you one and he said, no, that's going to be mine one day.
Yeah.
And so what I'd like to understand is, I pray and hope for things that are positive about
Yeah.
Israel. But if that's a big part of somebody's heart, how do you get that turned around?
Yeah.
I was reading The Lemon Tree years ago. It's just.
So for people at home, Diane is saying that when she hears people express the long view on the side of the Palestinians regarding the right of return, they look at the homes in West Jerusalem, in the neighborhoods of Katmon and Baca and Emek Rephaim. These were wealthy Arab neighborhoods, and now they're wealthy Jewish neighborhoods. Look up Shaul Magid. I think that was his name. Magid? No, that wasn't his name either. I promise you I'll find it. Anyway, so Diane's thinking about people who say, I don't want a house like that one. I want my house back. And those are really difficult to overcome feelings. But what did I start with? I started with showing you liturgy of hours that we have been reciting for, I mean, some of them for 1,000 years, literally saying, my heart is in the east, but but I am in the far, far west. You know, we never stopped looking. Hatikva is the hope of 2,000 years of our right of return. And so I don't know how to reconcile that, Diane. You're right. Yeah.
Are we also in the middle of a battle between Iran and, say, more conservative Saudi Arabia and the various Arab countries fighting for domination over
So,
economic as
yeah.
well as political?
Sheldon's asking about the expansion of the, I'll call it the matzav. That's the Hebrew word for situation. It's how they, in shorthand, say the current status, the matzav. What's the matzav? What's going on? What's the situation? So Sheldon's asking about the matzav as it relates to all the warring and competing Arab nations. And tonight, I'm not going to go that far. I'm not going to go into that. Here's my expectation, my hope, my plan. In Hebrew, we might say, Be'ezrat Hashem, with God's help, what I'm about to say will come to be. I'd like to do one more session, but I think it's going to need to wait until I get back from my short sabbatical in January. We missed 2, but I think rather than making up 2, I'm going to try to do it with 1 session, and I'm going to hope to deal with the matzav. My guess is we will not have solved peace in the Middle East by then. And so there will still be what to talk about. I will try to explain a little bit more about the dynamics of what's going on in Gaza and in Lebanon. We'll take a look at where we are at that point in the West Bank. It changes sort of slowly at times and quickly at other times. I'll bring Iran into it and Syria, although Syria is a changing face rapidly. So, yeah, Saudi Arabia, right, Yemen. All right. Whew. Anyone else exhausted? We cover a lot of ground together. Oh, gosh, I ran over time too. So, as I said, I will send out a lot of information either tonight or tomorrow morning to help kind of give all of this to you. You can go back and digest it at your pace. And as thoughts, questions, or concerns arise, please don't hesitate. Reach out. You know, the only way we work on this stuff is to discuss. And I'll listen, I promise.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Lee?
Thanks, Amy. Thanks, everybody. Good night, Mom.
Ready? Let go. Ready? 1, 2,
I
3.
wonder if her.
I-24 News now has it English.
Yeah, I haven't loved I-24.